Welcome to Fantasy Football Today. We're coming to you live from all of our homes once again. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Dave, and the man who's been self-quarantined since 2018, that's Adam Azer. Gentlemen, we had some wide receiver news on Tuesday. Let's talk about it here now. Robbie Anderson goes to the Panthers. I don't really love this move because I think it takes him out of the mix of being a potential good fantasy option, and I think it hurts all of the Panthers across the board. Dave, Richard, what say you about this move of Robbie Anderson to Carolina?
I think you're going to see the Panthers spread the ball around quite a bit. It's what we saw at LSU with that spread formation offense. It means Robbie's going to get some good playing time, but I think the targets from game to game aren't going to be very good. But I did double check on some of his numbers over the past 4 seasons, and his catch rate was below 55% each of those 4 years. On top of that, last year, he only had a 60% catch rate in terms of potentially catchable balls. So a lot of throws that were made in New York last year just were not good enough. But you go and you look at Teddy Bridgewater, and last year, 79% of his throws with the Saints were on target. There was only one receiver out of 6 that caught more than 10 targets from Teddy Bridgewater. And that guy, the only one that didn't have 59% was Ted Ginn. He was a deep ball threat. I'm wondering how much the Panthers are actually going to use Robbie Anderson as a deep ball receiver. He might be more of a decoy. Definitely my third favorite among the because he'll get more target volume on those shorter passes. I think his ship sailed as being a deep threat. That's why Robbie Anderson was added to the Carolina offense.
Yeah, I think it's a downgrade to everybody across the board. Slightly for DJ Moore, big downgrade for Curtis Samuel, downgrade for Ian Thomas. And again, I don't like Robbie Anderson in this destination with the Panthers, but an upgrade for Teddy Bridgewater nonetheless. Sam Darnold gets a slight upgrade with Rashad Perryman stepping in for Robbie Anderson because he just needed somebody to throw to. But I think this is good news for Jamison Crowder still being the #1 option in the passing game. Heath, when you look at Rashad Perryman going to the Jets, is it just another clone of Robbie Anderson? How do you think this move helps the Jets and helps Perryman?
Dave seemed like he was kind of poo-pooing Robbie Anderson to the Panthers, but he sent me a very excited message about Rashad Perryman, telling me that Perryman averaged 20.8 fantasy points per game in his final 5 games. Now he's going to New York to be the #1 wide receiver. And I responded, Rashad Perryman's going to play the slot. This is an Adam Gase offense. They don't take very many shots down the field. I don't believe Perryman's as good a receiver or a deep threat as Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson only saw 96 targets in this offense with, you said it, Jamison Crowder dominating the targets. So I expect that will remain the same. It's an interesting thing both with Gase and with Perryman. If you look at what their track record over the last 5 years suggests, you wouldn't think there's much reason for optimism at all. Those last 5 games from Perryman do change the equation just a little bit, but I look at him as more of a boom or bust #4, #5 wide receiver. Probably not someone I'm drafting, but maybe someone that I'll pick up off the waiver wire mid-season when he has a good matchup.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think this keeps Crowder certainly in a very solid position and doesn't necessarily change things for Sam Darnold. Maybe we'll see what the tight end position holds for the Jets if Chris Herndon can actually get on the field and start to produce. Obviously, Le'Veon Bell should still be the same type of player he was last year. Take that for what it's worth. Adam, you get the, I don't even know how to say it, just the fun conversation to talk about Devin Funchess going to the Packers. We thought the Packers would be in the mix to get somebody prominent to help Davante Adams, to help Aaron Rodgers. I just don't think that this is quite the answer.
No, if you want to spin it with some optimism, he was the #20 wide receiver in 2017 with the Carolina Panthers, and Cam Newton threw for less than 3,400 yards that year. Now, the circumstances were really good for Devin Funchess. Greg Olsen played only 7 games. Kelvin Benjamin played only 8 games that year, and Funchess took advantage of it, and he had 8 touchdowns. That's been the only season where he's really been a factor. But the optimism is that this is definitely the best quarterback as a passer that he's ever played with by far. You can say Cam Newton was a really good quarterback, but when it comes to his passing numbers compared to Aaron Rodgers, it's not even close. I don't think this is moving the needle much at all. Maybe it gets a few more touchdowns for Aaron Rodgers or something like that, but I'm not drafting Devin Funchess, and I still expect the Packers to use the NFL draft to address this position.
Yeah, I think the only benefit right now that we see from this is that Davante Adams still in a very good spot. The fact that they didn't add any of the prominent free agent wide receivers or make a trade similar to what Arizona or Buffalo did keeps Davante Adams right now very much in a great spot to be a top 3 wide receiver going in to fantasy for 2020. Speaking of Devontae Adams, he was a first-round pick. We held a 12-team PPR mock draft on Tuesday. It was right before the Robbie Anderson news happened, so we're going to tell you where Robbie Anderson ended up. But let's take a look at round one, see how it all unfolded. All four of us were in the draft, as well as our producer, Andrew Baumer, several other cast of characters from the CBS Sports Fantasy crew. As you see, no surprise, McCaffrey, Barkley, Michael Thomas, Kamara, those guys at the top. It's where we get to number 8 where things start to get a little bit interesting, and that was my pick of DeAndre Hopkins. Now, I took Hopkins in this spot on purpose. I would rather have Julio Jones and potentially Tyreek Hill. I haven't really decided yet if I'm going to take Hopkins or Hill as the 4th receiver off the board, but I would take Julio Jones. But I took Hopkins as a talking point, more so from the standpoint of how he shakes up in comparison to Tyreek Hill and Julio Jones. So, Adam, since you drew the short straw and got Devin Funchess, I'll give you the first word here. When you look at Hopkins, is 8 too soon? Did I get a good pick there? Or should he have fallen a little bit further in the first round?
I think that he should have fallen maybe a little bit further, but only if you're taking running backs ahead of him. I think it's fine to take him as the number 2 or number 3 wide receiver. Tyreek Hill in 2018 had 87 catches, and he had 12 touchdowns. He had almost 1,500 yards. But you kind of know you're not going to get a lot of catches from him. Hopkins has consistently been 100 or more catches. So I don't think I'm taking Tyreek Hill in a PPR league ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. I think your pick was fine. Maybe, for me, I'm the only one in the world, but I think maybe Miles Sanders I would have taken ahead of him because I'm really high on him. But you'd have to find that running back that you, in your personal preference, absolutely love and expect to be truly elite this year. To somebody like maybe it's Eckler, maybe it's Kenyan Drake, whatever, to take over Hopkins there.
I know Dave shares your same sentiment about Hopkins as the top 2 or 3 receiver off the board, but Heath, you're a little bit more pessimistic about Hopkins. You would not have taken him at that spot.
Yeah, I think Adam brought up a good point with Tyreek Hill. Yes, Tyreek Hill showed us the ability to be the best wide receiver in fantasy with only 87, 88 catches, but he did that because he's the most efficient wide receiver on a per-catch basis that we've ever seen. DeAndre Hopkins has never been that efficient, so I don't know why we would now expect that we're going to see that type of efficiency from Hopkins when he's going to a situation that looks like it's worst for fantasy production. The Arizona Cardinals run an offense that is likely going to distribute the ball far more evenly than what they've done in Houston, where Hopkins has averaged at least 10 targets per game. And I don't think we have any reason to expect that Kyler Murray is as good a passer at this point in their career as what we've seen from Deshaun Watson.
All right, as we go from Hopkins, that was the 8th spot. Dave Richard picking at number 11 took Derrick Henry, another player that I'm not so fond of as a first-round pick, but Dave, you had no hesitation taking the leading rusher from 2019 as a first-round pick in 2020.
You know, Jamie, one of the things about the mock drafts and what I get out of them personally this time of year is that I'm able to review what I do and determine whether or not I like it or dislike it. And one of the things I did after the draft was double check this pick, and I legitimately believe I made a mistake in round 1 by taking Derrick Henry. You go back and you compare him to Chris Godwin, who was the next pick off the board. It was the receiver that I was looking at. Godwin averaged more fantasy points per game in PPR than Derrick Henry. He played fewer games than Derrick Henry. They were within 9 points of each other in full PPR. I think the better move for me would have been taking Godwin first, letting Chris Towers, who had picks 12 and 13 overall, take whatever he takes there. And then maybe Derrick Henry falls to me in round 2. And then I would have had Godwin and Henry and started with a balanced approach to my offense. And here's the thing. I don't think any of us agree that Derrick Henry is going to be exactly what he was last year. And he was a dynamo last year. And even if he was, look how close he was to Godwin, who we think could be as good, if not better, given the fact that he only played 14 games in 2019. So I learned my lesson from this. You won't see me do this again. I'm going to take Godwin the next time I'm in a situation of lining him up versus Derrick Henry.
All right, so there's Dave learning his lesson on receiver versus running back, Godwin versus Henry. And as Dave said, Godwin went at number 12 overall to Chris Towers. Heath, when you look at Godwin, should he be a first-round pick at this point with the move of getting Tom Brady as his new quarterback, replacing Jameis Winston? As we all see it right now, it seems to be somewhat of an upgrade, despite the fact that Godwin was pretty good in 2019 with Jameis.
Yeah, I think it could be an upgrade in terms of volume. It could be an upgrade for this year in terms of the fact he could just play 16 games. But I do think in a PPR league, we just get to that point where there's not another running back that I want to take. I mean, I think Dave was the only person in the last 6 picks to take a running back, and he regrets it. So if we're going to take 6 wide receivers back to back to back, then I think you have to consider Godwin as a late first-round pick. The one guy who didn't go in the first round in this draft that I would expect will go in the first round in future drafts is Travis Kelce.
Yep, that was a pick to me in round 2. As we move on from round 1 to round 2, I think Chris Godwin is going to see some first-round love, again, now that Tom Brady's there. And as you have probably heard us say on our Fantasy Football Today podcast and some of our shows here on HQ, we all prefer Chris Godwin over Mike Evans, even with Tom Brady now under center. Not that we don't like Mike Evans, but Godwin playing in the slot just has a little bit of a better opportunity to get better targets and hopefully produce at a higher level like he did last year. Injury played a little bit of a role with that, but Godwin had a breakout season in 2019 that should carry over to 2020. All right, let's get to round 2 here as we take a look at some of the moves starting at 13th overall, and this one could be a little bit of a controversial pick. Like I said, we did this draft right before the Panthers signed Robbie Anderson, so I don't know if DJ Moore would necessarily go 13th overall in most drafts. I asked Chris Towers after the draft, would he still take DJ Moore in that spot? He said yes. He thinks it's more of a downgrade for Curtis Samuel than it is for DJ Moore. So I know we kind of talked DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson a little bit at the top of the show, but Adam, I'll ask you this. Should DJ Moore go this high, and how much of a downgrade should Moore see now that Robbie Anderson's on the roster?
The only pick that was made after DJ Moore that I think definitely should have been made before DJ Moore is Travis Kelce. After that, I really think you can make arguments for just about anyone that went in this round. I think Adam Thielen, who I took 19th, is a better prospect right now for fantasy this year than DJ Moore. But I could see it. Look, in his last 7 healthy games, he really broke out. He was on pace for 110 catches, 1,600 yards, and 7 touchdowns on 171 targets. We're not going to see that kind of production, but he definitely could be a 100-catch guy. I don't love the pick. I really don't. I think DJ Moore is more of a late round 2 pick. I worry about the touchdowns. I don't know that Teddy Bridgewater is going to throw more than 22 or 23 touchdowns. So I think Moore's potential to have more than maybe 8 touchdowns is kind of low. So I think it's a little bit early, but I love round 1. Round 2, I mean, I think there are a lot of good players there, obviously, but I think there are a lot of picks that are kind of questionable and make me a little queasy, to be quite honest. DJ Moore, 13th overall, is one of them.
Dave, you feel the same way, or you differ on that?
You know, I don't even know if DJ Moore is worth a round 2 pick in PPR. And I know that sounds crazy because of his catch potential, but they are going to spread the ball around. It's not going to be a situation where DJ Moore is going to get huge target volume game after game after game like we saw last year. I think Curtis Samuel is still going to be involved in this offense. He just might not run as deep of routes, and that might actually help him pick up some of that target share from DJ Moore. And of course, Robbie Anderson's there. Let's not forget about Christian McCaffrey. Let's not forget about Ian Thomas. This is going to be a team that will spread it. And that makes me worried about DJ Moore. I don't have him in my top 25 overall in my PPR rankings. So this is someone I'm fading.
Heath, you feel the same way too?
Not exactly. I do think Dave's right. They're going to spread the ball around, but they're going to throw the ball 600 plus times because they're going to be absolutely terrible, and they're playing in the best offensive division in football. So I think DJ Moore will be just fine as a 2nd round pick, just not at number 13.
Okay, so still in the 2nd round for Heath, outside of round 2 for Dave. I think he's borderline end of round 2 type of pick, depending on how many receivers come off the board. He's still a top 12 wide receiver for me. But again, I downgraded him a couple of spots because of Robbie Anderson joining the roster. I posted the first round results on Twitter. One question that I got was, where is Nick Chubb? As you see, Nick Chubb is in round 2. I think he loses with Kareem Hunt still on the roster. As we saw last year, over 18 PPR points per game in the first 10 games without Kareem Hunt. When Hunt came back from his 8-game suspension, that number dropped significantly for Nick Chubb. So, Heath, when you look at Chubb and what he brings to the table, new coach in Kevin Stefanski, more of a run-based system, potentially after what we saw Stefanski do in Minnesota, should Nick Chubb be a first-round pick, or is he a second-round selection?
I think he's a first-round pick in non-PPR. I think this was the right move, though, in PPR for him to not be drafted in the first round just because of what you talked about. Not just Kareem Hunt, but also Austin Hooper coming in, which signifies to me they're probably going to throw more passes to their tight ends, which generally means fewer passes to the running backs. This is an absolutely stacked offense. But Kevin Stefanski, you mentioned him, one of the most run-heavy offenses last year, also one of the more slower offenses in terms of total play volume. I think they're going to be a team that wants to rely on their defense and their run game and then be good throwing the ball as well. They'll throw it more than Minnesota did last year, but I don't expect this to be a high volume offense in terms of the total number of plays they run. Chubb is a low end number 1, high end number 2 running back for me in PPR.
Dave, I think you're probably the highest on Nick Chubb. Would you have taken him in the first round, given if more running backs had gone off the board? Let's say Henry went sooner, maybe Eckler goes sooner. Would you have taken Nick Chubb in the first round?
Not a chance. No way would I take Nick Chubb in the first round of a PPR draft. It's different in non-PPR. And here's what I wrestle with Nick Chubb. Number one, amazing talent, maybe one of the 5 best running backs in the National Football League. But how much is he going to catch the ball? And how often are the Browns going to be playing with a lead? So as much as we can look at Kevin Stefanski coming to Cleveland and saying, yeah, he's going to run the ball more, A, it's not going to be Chubb getting all those carries because Kareem Hunt's there. And B, they can want to run it all they want to. But what's going to happen when they're down 21-3 in the third quarter against the Ravens and Nick Chubb's going to be out of the game plan? I think I've got Chubb ranked too high as it is. I've got him 19th overall in PPR. I think that's just way too high. There is going to be demand for running backs on draft day. Chubb should be one of the guys you resist in PPR.
Yeah, well, I think round 2 is not necessarily someplace you should resist him, but this is a good spot for him, not a first-round pick. I think is kind of what we're telling you with Kareem Hunt, with Austin Hooper, with all the weapons there. In Cleveland, one in particular is Odell Beckham, and somebody that we've been a little bit down on after what we saw from him in 2019, but not our buddy Will Brinson. With the 3rd to last pick in the 2nd round, Will took Odell Beckham ahead of Mike Evans, ahead of Amari Cooper, and this is going to be one of a couple times Adam Aizer gets to kind of give Will Brinson the business, not necessarily to his face, which is something Adam likes to do. But Adam, you did not like this pick of Odell Beckham in round 2.
Well, no, actually, Will made a good pick in round 3. He should have taken that player in round 2. I won't spoil that. But Beckham, I think it's justifiable mid-round 3. And let's also say, I don't know if we've said this was a 3 wide receiver league. So you're going to see some good running back value when we get to round 3. I understand taking a wide receiver there, but Beckham, he's just so injured every year in, year out. I think there's good bounce back potential for Beckham because he played against a brutal schedule. When he had good matchups, he was really good. Now we expect him to be more than that. But also the offensive line got immediately better when they signed Conklin at right tackle. That's going to help. The new coaching staff could only help. Beckham could definitely rebound. I don't really have a problem with Beckham, as a top 30 pick. But yes, ahead of Evans, ahead of Cooper, ahead of Kittle. Are you kidding me? Ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster. Way too early. Will, you stink, man. If you're watching.
And that's the player you alluded to. Will did take Juju Smith-Schuster. So if it was Juju in round 2, Beckham in round 3, that would make you feel better?
Ironically, I mean, it's the same exact thing, right? But yes, I think he would have gone about it in a smarter way, taking Juju in round 2. I'm assuming the 3 of you like Juju better than Odell Beckham.
Yeah, we all like Juju better than Beckham. Heath, you sort of laid this out with Nick Chubb, just, kind of continue that point about all the mouths to feed in this offense for the Browns, how it will hurt Odell Beckham as well.
Yeah, and I think I was really more on board with the Odell Beckham bounce back before they went and signed Austin Hooper. But now we're looking at an offense that's probably going to be slow, probably going to be a little bit more run heavy, and added a significant pass option in the passing game. The only way I can really see this working out as a 2nd round value is if Jarvis Landry's injury lingers into the start of the season.
All right, so we had one Cardinals player come off the board in the first 2 rounds. There's one that was missing, though, as we start to take a look to round 3 and the rest of the mock draft here. Kenyan Drake, where was he in the first 2 rounds? We should have probably seen him come off the board in round 2. Will he be there in round 3, or did he fall even further? Stay right here to Fantasy Football Today. We'll tell you where Kenyan Drake was drafted. Coming up next. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're taking a look at our 12-team PPR mock draft. We start quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, tight end, a flex. We'll forget about the other positions, 6 reserves as well. We're into round 3 so far. And as we take a look at the picks that have come off the board, we start to see some quarterbacks. We see Lamar Jackson ahead of Patrick Mahomes here. As we told you in the first segment when we were talking about guys that maybe should have gone in the 2nd round, George Kittle, Juju Smith-Schuster, they fall to round 3. Same with Kenyan Drake. We'll talk about him coming up in a minute. Todd Gurley falls all the way to the end of round 3, or maybe that was a little bit too soon. We'll tell you about Gurley and where Melvin Gordon went coming up as well. But let's get into it with the quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson to George Maselli at 28th overall, ahead of Patrick Mahomes at 34th overall. We spent some time over the last couple of weeks. We told you about it on our Fantasy Football Today podcast that we all like Patrick Mahomes ahead of Lamar Jackson, except for our buddy George Maselli. So, Dave, when you see Lamar Jackson go here, obviously it's hard to say he was bad last year as the NFL MVP, the top fantasy scorer, but how will he do putting up those numbers again? Will he be able to bounce back and play at that same level, or is this going to be a little bit of a downturn, some regression coming for Lamar Jackson?
Look, if I say that he played bad last year, you should cut off my connection immediately, because Lamar Jackson was outstanding. I think a step back is in order here. I think right now every single defensive coordinator in the AFC North is poring over Lamar Jackson's film, and they're going to go ahead and find ways to try and defend him better. There are independent coaches that have courses online that you can take to learn about what the Ravens did last year and what they think the Ravens will do next year. It is the hottest topic. These coaches are pretty savvy. You've got to imagine that Lamar Jackson takes a step back in 2020. And with that being said, I'm not comfortable making him the #1 quarterback in fantasy when he doesn't have the potential to match what he did last year. I'm proud of George for waiting until round 3 to take Lamar Jackson. It's just not something I would have done. I feel a lot better going with Patrick Mahomes as the first quarterback in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I asked a couple of guys at the Pro Bowl about defending Lamar Jackson, TJ Watt in particular. I said, how are you going to do it? And he said, if we don't figure it out, we're going to be in a lot of trouble as a member of that AFC North. And I asked Lamar Jackson, I said, if you were a defensive coordinator, how would you defend yourself? And he said, I can't. So we'll find out how they're going to try and solve the Lamar Jackson riddle. Heath has a very beautiful background behind him, but if you take down that background, there's probably some Chiefs gear somewhere around his house. And so Patrick Mahomes helps Kansas City win the Super Bowl last year. Heath, we know that he struggled a little bit with the injuries. Obviously, it was a downturn from the 50 touchdowns to under 30. You're doing the projections. How are you projecting Patrick Mahomes as the #1 quarterback?
Yeah, somewhere in between what he did his first full year as a starter and his second. And I think even without the injury, we saw the regression, and we saw what I would say is pretty close to the downside for Patrick Mahomes. He had to play a little bit without Tyreek Hill. He had to play a little bit while he was injured. He had that regression that we expected. The thing that Dave kind of hit on, though, is Mahomes' expectation is just quite a bit higher than what Lamar Jackson's is. We know Jackson's eventually not going to run quite that much. We know Jackson's touchdown rate's going to come cratering back to earth. Mahomes feels pretty safe, and really the only guy that feels pretty safe is a 35 touchdown guy, a 45, 47, 4,800-yard passer. And I do think that he could get back closer to what he was in his first year as a starter than he was last year.
So Jackson at 28 overall, Mahomes at 34 overall. At 30th overall was a little bit of a steal, at least in my opinion. Kenyan Drake falls to Adam Azer, and I know when we were talking about some of the conversation we were going to have on the show today, we were texting last night, and Dave texted us and said, Kenyan Drake a steal to Adam Azer. I think that's the only way to describe it, because now with David Johnson gone from the Cardinals, what we saw from Drake at the end of last season was just absolutely fantastic. Averaged over 19 PPR points per game in his final 8 games in Arizona. Adam, how thrilled were you to get Drake at that spot?
I couldn't believe it. It took me 3 seconds to make the pick, as I see on CBSSports.com. The next running back was Le'Veon Bell, and then Josh Jacobs to you, which I thought was also a good pick. But so happy to have Kenyan Drake there. I was considering him in the 2nd round, but I didn't want to start a 3-receiver league with 2 running backs. Really, really happy with it. I do have some concerns about the catches. I've talked about this on this show. I've talked about this on the podcast. The catches for Drake in his 8 games with Arizona were really high, but they were top-heavy. They're basically in the first 3 games. The last 5 games, he didn't catch a lot of balls. And now you add DeAndre Hopkins. And you've got a mobile quarterback. They don't throw to running backs as much as non-mobile quarterbacks. I still think if he's a 40-catch guy, and I take the over, but even if he's a 40-catch guy, 3rd round for Kenyan Drake is still good value, because I think he's going to score touchdowns, he's going to have a bunch of total yards. They really like him. He's going to get work. And they won 2 games with Kenyan Drake last year. The Cardinals won 2 games. He had 22 or more carries in both of those games, the only wins that they had with Drake. So I think they're going to feature him, and I think that he could give 1st-round value. I was so happy to get him 30th overall.
Adam, I was planning to take him at 17th overall in the 2nd round, except Travis Kelce fell to me, and there was no way I was taking Drake over Kelce. But that's the spot where I was like, okay, I'm going to get a receiver in round 1. I'm probably going to look at Drake at round 2 at 17 overall. But Travis Kelce just fell in my lap, and I couldn't pass it up. Same thing with Drake falling in your lap as well. Heath, Dave, any thoughts on Kenyan Drake falling to Adam and just how pissed off you were to see him get that type of a player in that spot?
I thought he got a great value. I don't like.
Go ahead, Heath.
I thought that Drake was a great value there, but I didn't like Azer said, the very next guy I took Le'Veon Bell, and then Josh Jacobs went, and I really think all of those guys belong in the same type of category. Drake just has more upside based on what he did in that half a season last year, but the expectation I have very similar for all three of those backs. In PPR, I think Bell could actually be the best of the three.
Yeah, I'm not feeling
so
that. I think. Sorry, Jamie. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Adam Gase didn't want Le'Veon Bell on the team, and they just spent a ton of money on their offensive line. It's completely unclear if they actually upgraded. I think the arrow is definitively pointing down for Le'Veon Bell. That said, I mean, getting him in the third round, I think it was a good pick, Heath. But I think I just think Kenyan Drake, I'm not saying this because it was my pick, I just think Kenyan Drake is on such another tier right now, higher tier than Le'Veon Bell. I'm not as optimistic. I understand that if Le'Veon Bell gets the same amount of touches he had last year, you can only assume he's going to average a higher yards per carry because it was so low, and you can only assume he's going to score more. He just had so many touches. But I don't know how much they want him there, how much faith they have in there, and I still think they have a really terrible offense. So I'm selling Le'Veon Bell. I think it was a good pick where you got him. I just think Kenyan Drake is in a different stratosphere.
Yeah, the one benefit, I think, if you're looking at Bell from a standpoint of touches, they're losing players in terms of Robbie Anderson, and I don't know if Rashad Perryman all of a sudden makes that offense that much better. So it should still funnel through Le'Veon Bell as much as it potentially can. If that's a good thing, we'll find out. Last year was not the greatest situation for Bell, but sitting out a full season, who knows how much that impacted him after missing 2018, coming back in 2019. Speaking of running backs, as we take a look at the end of round 3, moving into round 4, Todd Gurley with the last pick in round 3. First pick of round 4, as we take a look at the picks that have come off the board there, Melvin Gordon. So Chris Towers does the swing picks there of taking the two running backs, the two prominent running backs who have switched teams, with Gurley going to the Falcons after he was released by the Rams, and Melvin Gordon signing with the Broncos. So Dave, you picked in front of Chris. You took Cooper Kupp, understandably so, after taking two running backs to start your team. If you have done it differently, had taken Godwin in round 1 and then maybe Henry in round 2, and you saw Todd Gurley sitting there at the end of round 3, would that be something that you would have considered, or Melvin Gordon as well, looking at what Chris did at the start of round 4?
So that would come down to how I feel about Cooper Kupp versus both of those running backs. And I do like Gurley better than Gordon just because I think Gurley's going to have the higher percentage of total touches with his team. And I like his situation better than Melvin Gordon's situation now with Denver. I think I might have taken Todd Gurley there, and it would have been the first time in 2 years that I drafted Todd Gurley in a fantasy draft, especially one of our mocks. But you know what? Facts are facts. A lot of touchdowns are up for grabs in Atlanta. They don't have another running back that can challenge him as of yet. And as long as he's healthy, he's probably going to get a decent amount of work for the Falcons. So yeah, if I had taken Godwin in round 1, like I said I will do next time, and then I get either Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry in round 2, I think the move for me at that point would have been to take a running back first, knowing that Chris, who picked at 12 and 13, took 2 receivers to start his team. He needs running backs. I'm going to take a running back before he can get his hands on one of them. Gurley would have been the pick for me.
So we can take a look at the picks that started in round 4. Gordon was the first one there. Heath, I'll just let you talk about Gordon. When you see this move, joining Phillip Lindsay, we've spent a lot of time talking about what the breakdown could be. Is this the right spot for Melvin Gordon, knowing that he's going to share some time?
I mean, I don't think it's a bad pick. There are wide receivers that I'd rather have in that spot. This is a 3 wide receiver league, so I think Chris could have taken one. I mean, you kind of put yourself in that position. It's a little bit awkward when you go wide receiver from the 12 spot, because you got 2 picks next, and if you don't take 2 running backs, you know you're waiting till the end of the 5th round for your second running back. That doesn't always feel good. I think Gordon's fine in the 4th round. I'd prefer not to take him with the very first pick of the 4th round. I do expect that Denver is going to have enough touches for Gordon to be a solid number 2 running back. Not what he was with the Chargers, but a solid number 2, and that's what you're taking in this range of the draft. I don't think this is going to be like a 50-50 split or anything. I would expect Gordon to have more than his fair share over Lindsay.
Yeah, and I guess just from Chris's standpoint, he did go receiver, as Dave said. There's probably just looking at it from picking on the ends. You want to get the player that you want. He obviously probably had some interest in Melvin Gordon, wasn't going to get him certainly on his next two picks. So that may have played a factor into why he took him maybe over guys like Cortland Sutton, Allen Robinson, some of the other receivers I know that you were referencing there. All right, Adam, so you took a shot at Will Brinson for taking Odell Beckham in round 2, but you said that you liked Zach Ertz falling to round 4. That was Will's pick in this round. Is that just a good value pick, or is this kind of what we're going to see with Zach Ertz? I think we're going to see him fall to round 4 on a pretty consistent basis.
Certainly in a 3-receiver league that also starts a flex. I think anytime I'm used to playing 2 receivers, 2 running backs, tight end, and a flex. You add another position in there, a wide receiver is going to score more points than tight ends. I think it devalues tight ends a little bit. I don't know that there's consensus on that, but that's how I see it. I understand the argument against Zach Ertz. His target share was very, very different when Alshon Jeffrey was on the field compared to when Alshon Jeffrey either did not play or left the game early with an injury. But he's still a top 4 tight end 3 years in a row. And I think he's becoming a little underrated if he's going, 44th or something like that overall, 46th overall. So, I think it's good. And I don't love the tight ends after him. I like Mark Andrews, who went 5 or 6 picks later. But I think it was a bad offseason so far for tight ends. I think Austin Hooper lost value. I think Hunter Henry may have lost value with the quarterback downgrade. I think this position got deeper in terms of late-round guys, but the mid-tier guys, I think they lost. Jared Cook lost with the addition of Emmanuel Sanders. Evan Ingram's in a crowd. So, I think Ertz is the best option in the passing game for the Eagles. We cannot rely on Alshon Jeffrey being as good as he was last year. We cannot rely on Alshon Jeffrey staying on the field. They still haven't added a wide receiver. They got nothing from Arcega-Whiteside last year. So Zach Ertz is still their guy, and he really does have potential to still be, very close to elite. He's not going to be Kelsey. He's not going to be Kittle. He could be just below that. I still believe that.
All right, don't disregard Greg Ward, though. The savior of the Eagles' passing attack last year coming on is still one of their top wide receivers right now. All right, so we had a couple receivers come off the board in round 4, maybe a little bit too soon. Devontae Parker, DK Metcalf, as we transition into round 5, and we take a look at some of the guys that have had some news happen to them. Stephon Diggs and A.J. Green, this is where they come off the board as we start to see the picks in the 5th round with Diggs, with Green, some of the other running backs that have also come off the board. T.Y. Hilton gets a potential boost with Phillip Rivers joining the roster. So let's just have a broad wide receiver conversation here with Parker and Metcalf going ahead of Green, going ahead of Diggs. You could throw Gallup and Hilton in there as well. Dave, did you think that was just too soon? And how good of a value is it for Diggs and A.J. Green in round 5?
Tremendous value for Diggs and Green. Terrible picks for Parker and for DK Metcalf. And I like the potential of DK Metcalf to maybe even be the #1 receiver in Seattle. And Devontae Parker, there's a chance he could pick up where he left off last year, but I'd still rather go with A.J. Green for sure over both those guys because we know what A.J. Green's potential is, and I'm a big believer in the direction of Cincinnati's offense now that Joe Burrow expected to be the quarterback there. Stephon Diggs in Buffalo, I'm not nearly as high on. I'd rather have A.J. Green. I'd rather have Tyler Boyd too, because I just don't see Stephon Diggs getting a huge bump in targets and getting a better catch rate and a better average depth of target now that he's with Buffalo. I think he's going to be the same inconsistent type of receiver that he's been. He'll deliver 2 or 3 huge games over the course of the year, but he'll have a lot of games with 60 or fewer yards. I think he was a pretty bad pick in round 4.
All right, so Tyler Boyd ahead of Diggs for Dave. Heath, do you buy that? Are you taking Boyd over Diggs?
Obviously not. I took Stephon Diggs there, and it was one of the best wide receiver values we had. He may just be the same guy that he's been in Minnesota, which is going to be a top 20 wide receiver, and as compared to A.J. Green, who's 32 years old and has played 9 games in the last 2 seasons. I think Diggs should have gone probably a half round to a round earlier. I do think he will get a higher target share without having Adam Thielen on the other side of the field on a team that's likely to throw the ball just as much as Minnesota did. So I expect Diggs to be right around wide receiver 18, wide receiver 19. I hope that A.J. Green is there as well, but he's going to share with Tyler Boyd. It will really depend on whether Green gets into camp or how much camp we have with his rookie quarterback or likely rookie quarterback, Joe Burrow.
Yeah, you took Diggs right in front of me. I was not happy. I was hoping Diggs would fall one more spot. I ended up with Michael Gallup. Not a bad consolation prize, but I would have preferred Stephon Diggs. And as you see here, as we wrap up round 5, David Johnson finally coming off the board. No surprise. Chris Towers takes him to add to his collection of Melvin Gordon and Todd Gurley taking all the running backs who have switched teams this offseason. Chris is having a nice little running back core there, or maybe not. We'll see how they all perform in 2020. Speaking of running backs, Todd Gurley's replacement finally comes off the board. We'll tell you where next as we take a look at round 6, 7, and 8. Darrell Henderson finally getting drafted. I was really thrilled to take him. We're going to take a look at Darrell Henderson's fantasy value as the new running back in Los Angeles coming up next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're recapping our 12-team PPR mock draft that we held on Tuesday, giving you a taste of what that could look like maybe for some upcoming drafts. Now, no rookies in this draft yet, so we're going to add those in the next coming weeks as we get closer to the NFL draft, but we wanted to see what happened with free agency and some of the moves that may have impacted certain players. As we take a look at the players coming off the board in round 6, I had a tough call to make at 65 overall. I already had 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and Travis Kelce. And so did I want to take a third receiver in Julian Edelman? That was the guy I was debating. Maybe Will Fuller as well. Or did I want to take a shot on Darrell Henderson, who seems to be the guy replacing Todd Gurley for the Rams? So I took the player who I thought had the most upside, which was Darrell Henderson. I'll throw it out to you guys. Do you agree that I made the right choice, or did I make the wrong choice taking Henderson over one of those wide receivers? Dave, you get the first word.
I think you did. We don't know for sure that Darrell Henderson's going to be the guy in LA. And look at that logo, by the way. It's totally different, kind of jarring when you see a different Rams logo at this point. And this is a different running back. And last year, he had 5 plays of 10-plus yards from scrimmage. That's the good news. The bad news is that he had 19 rushes for 2 yards or less. Can he improve? Can he do it in time to completely make everybody in LA forget about Todd Gurley as the former face of the franchise at the running back position? There will come a time when we'll know more about this backfield, and it'll really be after the draft. If they don't add anybody of significance post-draft, then it will look like Darrell Henderson will deserve some credit as a top 70 pick on draft day, and maybe the hype spins out of control, and by the time we get to August and September, he's a top 50 pick. But for now, I think you just went a little too soon on him. But in saying that, I'm not so sure he would have made it back to you in the next round. So if you really loved him, Jamie, you did the right thing by picking him up.
Adam, you ended up with Edelman. What would you have done?
I actually ended up with Will Fuller. So I was going to throw it back to you. Yeah, and I was going to throw it back to you with 2 questions. I think the Henderson pick was good. I mean, that's how you win fantasy. You take shots on guys who have huge upside, right? But Kerryon Johnson was the pick before you. Would you have taken Henderson or Kerryon Johnson? And 2, what about Will Fuller? Because I think when you look at Darrell Henderson and Will Fuller, you were talking about 2 players who have the chance to step into a bigger role and have breakout seasons.
Well, I would have taken Henderson, actually. I'm sorry, I would have taken Kerryon Johnson over Henderson, but if we, as Dave said, if we get past the NFL draft and Henderson's the guy, then I think Henderson's in a better spot than Kerryon Johnson, just based on what we've seen from Kerryon for 2 years, struggling with injury, with what Henderson could hopefully be as the guy for Sean McVay in that Rams offense. And Fuller, like I said, it's Fuller, Edelman were the 2 receivers I was looking at. We'll find out who the quarterback's going to be for Edelman. That could determine how he falls in some drafts, like he potentially did here, or maybe he goes a little bit sooner. And Fuller, like you said, replacing DeAndre Hopkins as the guy now for Houston. At least that's what we assume it to be. Could be Kenny Stills, could be somebody that they add in the draft, but we'll find out what, in fact, the Texans decide to do. Let's move now to round 7 as we continue to recap this mock draft. And we see some guys that are also impacted by free agency coming off the board here. Phillip Lindsay, as we know, loses because of the move to get Melvin Gordon in Denver. Austin Hooper goes now from a potential top 5 tight end to the number 7 tight end off the board in this draft at 74th overall. Heath, is that a good spot for him, or did he go maybe a little bit too soon in this draft?
I think he went too soon, just because I think that once you get past the top 7, you're looking at a big group of guys with upside, and I do still believe Hooper has upside. Not the same upside that he had in Atlanta, but there is a real concern for me with the number of pass attempts they're going to have, and the same thing we talked about earlier with Nick Chubb, with Odell Beckham, with all those mouths to feed. I just don't see, we're going to see tight ends that were drafted in the 11th or 12th round that I think have a pretty similar range of outcomes to Austin Hooper in Cleveland.
Dave, you like Hooper, though, still as a top 5 tight end, so you think this is a good value pick, right?
Yeah, I like him as a top 5. I like him as the 5th best tight end, but it's kind of by default. I don't have a 5th favorite. So the big 3, everybody knows about them. Mark Andrews makes it a big 4. And then is there an argument that can be made for a Waller or a Higbee or really about 6 other tight ends that could fill that spot? Hunter Henry can be one of them. I can't make it yet. I think Hooper's in Cleveland to be a short area target, to be a red zone threat. It wouldn't shock me in the least if he finished 3rd at the position in touchdowns in 2020, but we know that there's more to the position than just scoring touchdowns. I don't know if he's going to be quite as reliable as he was in Atlanta last year. He was averaging 7.5 targets per game. I would be stunned if he even came close to that. But 2 years ago, he was averaging 5.5 targets per game, and he wasn't bad. So for now, he's my number 5 tight end. It's just not a tight end that I'm very excited about taking. So 70th overall, it's maybe right around where I'd consider looking at him.
So Hooper comes off the board in round 7. Let's take a look at some of the players coming off the board in round 8. Some interesting running backs in this round. So Adam, I'm going to let you play professor. You're going to grade a couple of these picks. Dave took Raheem Mostert at 86th overall, and Heath took Jordan Howard at 90th overall. What do you think about these 2 selections as top reserve running backs for each of these guys? Dave getting Mostert, Heath getting Howard.
I'm going to give Dave an A. Raheem Mostert is awesome. Going to give Heath an F. I hate this pick. We are just going to be waiting and waiting for the rookie that the Dolphins draft to take over for Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard is not going to catch enough passes. He is not going to matter. It was best case scenario for him in Philadelphia, and that meant you felt comfortable starting him for, I don't know, maybe about a 3-week stretch. I'm sorry, Heath, you completely wasted a pick. This was not good. It was an F.
All right, Heath, defend yourself.
That is an interesting way to look at it, because we're afraid that the Dolphins are going to draft someone that Jordan Howard has to share with, whereas Raheem Mostert has Tevin Coleman. They brought back Jerick McKinnon. They brought back Matt Breida. We know he's not going to get a feature workload. And the other running backs taken in this round were Devontae Freeman, who does not have a team, and Boston Scott, who's the handcuff to Miles Sanders. There's no way it's an F in the 8th round. It's ridiculous.
All right.
There are other Fs in the 8th round, Heath, but it's not that Jordan Howard has to share. It's that Jordan Howard's going to get replaced.
Well,
as we
that
know,
didn't happen last year until you got hurt.
Adam's favorite running back of all time, Miles Sanders, was the beneficiary of Jordan Howard getting hurt and being replaced, and now Miles Sanders is the guy for the Eagles. We'll see what the Dolphins do. We do know what Buffalo did. They added a significant piece to their offense this offseason by getting Stephon Diggs. What does that mean for Josh Allen as a fantasy quarterback? We'll tell you coming up next here on Fantasy Football Today as we look at the final 2 rounds. We're going to review round 9 and round 10. Then we'll break down our teams and tell you who won and who lost this mock draft. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're wrapping up our discussion on our 12-team PPR mock draft, looking at round 9 and round 10 before we break down our teams. And as you see here in round 9, some interesting picks, couple of prominent tight ends. Tyler Higbee and Evan Ingram come off the board. Ingram, as we go from the first 100 picks to the next set of 100 picks, Ingram could be a good bounce-back candidate if his foot is healthy. Great quarterback value here. Deshaun Watson and Josh Allen coming off the board. 2 of my favorite sleeper running backs came off the board here, and Nyheim Hines to me. Justin Jackson to Ben Gretsch. We'll see if those are still in good standing picks once we get to the NFL draft. Most importantly with Justin Jackson, if he's the second guy behind Austin Eckler. In round 10, as we move along here, you see some good tight end value as well. Dave taking Noah Fant at pick number 110. John Brown still coming off the board at a relatively good spot here to RJ White. This was the handcuff round. Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, Chase Edmonds to Adam Azer backing up Kenyan Drake, Benny Snell. Interesting picks there, but could be some prominent fantasy options. And as you see, Aaron Rodgers comes off the board at 119th overall, ahead of Tom Brady, but our buddy Mayron Bergson took both of those quarterbacks, Rodgers first. I would take Brady over Rodgers. We'll see if that's the same thing once we get to the real drafts come August. So we all took part in this draft. We want to take a look at our teams and see how we did. Dave is going to be the first one up as we take a look at his team. And Dave told us at the start of the draft he regrets taking Derrick Henry at 11th overall. If he had done it again, he would have taken Chris Godwin over Henry. But Dave, when you look at your receivers, how happy are you with Chark, Kupp, and Ridley as your starting options?
And that was part of the plan. If I was going to take 2 running backs to begin, I knew I had to go after wide receivers pretty heavy after that. But when I got the receivers that I got, Kupp and then Calvin Ridley and then DJ Chark, I knew that I didn't need to go and get a ton of other receivers. And I actually like the running back values later on. David Montgomery, I believe it was my round 6 pick. Raheem Mostert, we talked about him in round 8. Gus Edwards in round 9. I was thrilled with my running back depth. It's all the more reason why I shouldn't have taken Derrick Henry first. Just imagine this team, cross out Derrick Henry's name, throw up Todd Gurley's name there, and then add Chris Godwin's name and throw out Calvin Ridley. And then I've got Kupp, Godwin, Joe Mixon, Todd Gurley, and that running back depth. I'd be excited, but for now, because I took Henry in round 1, I'll take the L.
Keith loves the Packers. He took both Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones with his first 2 picks. He stole Stephon Diggs from me in round number 5. Keith, when you take a look at your team, how happy are you?
I'm happy. It wasn't a team that, like, at any point I thought yay about drafting someone, but I did feel like I got a lot of values. Devontae Adams was just the next available player. So was Jones. Those first 2 for me were a little shaky, but Le'Veon Bell was my last PPR top 12 running back available. Stephon Diggs, again, I thought he was a great value. Darren Waller, my last tight end before a tier. So the guys that I ended up taking were more like everyone left them to me, but they were also good values at the same time. I did miss out on getting a top 12 quarterback, settled for Matthew Stafford. You can still stream quarterback. It's okay.
Yeah, a lot of depth at that position. One in particular is the guy that Adam took, Josh Allen. So Allen gets Stephon Diggs. When you look at that move, how excited are you about Josh Allen, Adam, when you look at your team and the guy captaining it from the quarterback position?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about Josh Allen. I like him better than Deshaun Watson, and I really like my team. I mean, I got a guy that I think could be a breakout quarterback in Allen. Cook, Drake, and Damian Williams at running back. Damian Williams was my 4th round pick. All 3 of those guys are going to be involved in the passing game, I think. To different degrees, but all 3 of them are the lead running backs on in good situations, let's say. And then T.Y. Hilton, he was the 26th wide receiver taken. I was really happy with this pick. I feel like T.Y. Hilton's being treated like Jacoby Brissett still his quarterback. I was very happy with that. I love Adam Thielen. I truly think Adam Thielen has a chance to be the number 2 wide receiver. Obviously, Michael Thomas is the favorite to be number 1. I think Thielen could have just a monster year. So I was happy to get Allen, rounded out my team nicely. Don't love my tight end. I do have Justin Tucker. You should all know that I have the best kicker, even though we never talk about kickers, but hooray for me. And so far, Jamie, it's going to be tough because I have clearly the best team that we've seen so far. Just saying.
No, I actually think you do, especially if Hilton bounces back to the level that he could, and Will Fuller is the guy. I just want to read a statement from Will Brinson, who was responding to all of the trash talking you've been saying to him. He said, "Who's Adam's team? I don't even need to see it because I know it's terrible. How? Because Azer drafted it." So he obviously did not look at your team. I like your team a lot. I think it's better than Will's, and I do think it's better than mine, but I like mine as well. Josh Jacobs, Devin Singletary at the running back spot. I think that Crowder is a capable number 3 wide receiver, but I do like Hopkins and Gallup as the top 2 guys, and obviously getting Travis Kelce in round 2 is a steal. Great mock draft review, guys. It was fun taking part in the PPR mock draft. We're going to do a non-PPR mock draft review on Friday after that draft on Thursday. We'll break that one down for you here on CBS Sports HQ. Check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. For Adam, for Dave, for Keith, I'm Jamie. Thanks for watching Fantasy Football Today. Want more of the Fantasy Football Today podcast and non-stop year-round fantasy advice? It's simple. Hit the subscribe button and hang with us all throughout the year.